Fighting. It's been a staple in high-level hockey forever.
What a fight! They even had to call in the police!
It's the thing that no other mainstream team sport just allows, where a punch or even a push in other team sports is grounds for pandemonium from all angles.
Oh my goodness! Gets thrown to the floor!
Fighting is just par for the course in the NHL. It's just part of the reason why hockey is the craziest sport in the world.
This is the first ever matchup between a couple of the super heavyweights.
I mean, sure, fighting in hockey comes with a penalty, but you can't just punch someone in the face 20 times and get back out on the ice 5 minutes later. Some NHL players even practice fighting. However, because fighting is allowed, the NHL has seen its fair share of vigilante justice over the years, in the form of beating up opponents who have wronged your team. And certain players have been employed to do just that, and some, for whatever reason, pretty much solely to fight. Enforcers. They're on the ice to dish out vigilante justice should the refs, in one team's opinion, be doing an inadequate job, or if the penalties that were called just weren't quite satisfactory compared to the infraction or injury inflicted, or theoretically just to prevent certain players from being hit at all simply due to their presence. Unlike other combat sports, they of course fight on ice, on skates. Unlike other combat sports, they fight many times a year. Unlike other combat sports, they may even fight multiple times in one night.
A second fight in the stoppage from Delorier.
And unlike other combat sports, hockey enforcers don't know when they're going to fight, and they battle with the mental aspects of potentially fighting any given day.
I fight, 25, 30 times a year. You just can't be ready every time.
It is quite possibly the most unique, bizarre, and insane job in all of sports. And even though they're often far and away the least skilled players on the ice, for any newer fans or naive people who think otherwise, given how enforcers get talked about, it's worth noting that anyone who can play NHL minutes is still a very good hockey player. You're not just throwing someone out there on the ice who can punch hard to do this job. But anyway, to the dismay of some fans, these days, there's far less fighting in hockey than there used to be. And also, there are far less enforcers than there used to be. And far less of the ones who are nowhere near skilled enough to stick around for their hockey ability alone, and are basically only there to fight, who we'll call pure enforcers. So, why are fights and pure enforcers less common than they used to be? Well, because those things interrelate, and things that caused fights featuring pure enforcers or enforcers of any kind happen less often. For one, in many games, there's less of a need or opportunity to dish out vigilante justice for dirty plays these days. A lack of premeditated attempts to injure in today's game is one of the main points for all this. This is true in regards to the league as a whole, but also there are far less extremely dirty individuals in today's game. We don't see a lot of those deliberate, I'm trying to injure you and nothing else plays these days. Most hits are spur-of-the-moment plays, and whether they're clean or dirty, they almost always aren't premeditated attempts to injure. Also, for the most part, the league casts a much wider net on plays that are deemed dirty than in the past. 25, 30 years ago, going headhunting with your shoulder meant great hit, and it happened all the time, to everyone. And the crackdown is especially noticeable for stuff that calling a minor penalty for 10, 20 years ago would have been unthinkable. And with that, there's less room to be a liability or to play dirty when you're more likely to cost your team. Unless you're the Panthers, am I right, hockey conspiracy theorists?
I'm the last person that should be receiving the accolades.
But perhaps more importantly, despite the game being less dirty, the game is also much faster than it used to be. So, plays resulting in penalties that are usually grounds for retaliation, the ones that are deemed worthy of someone catching a beating, still happen. Obviously, for some reason, penalties aren't called the same from year to year. So let's dig into some numbers and look at the general long-term trends from the past decade and a half. And keep in mind there have been more total games played in the season since the league expanded. Boarding penalties are often very subjective calls, but usually, if it's even up for debate, someone's fighting someone. And there are drastically less boarding penalties in today's game. Hits to the head can certainly be questionable, especially for the first bits of every season when the refs have been told to focus on them. But anyway, like boarding, if a play is even close to being a hit to the head, someone's probably fighting someone. Yet also, there are less hitting to the head penalties in today's game. A lot of people seem to think that there are more and more kneeing penalties every year. This year there was less than half of the amount that there was in 2010, and most plays that even ride the line for kneeing are called penalties. So less of those few types of plays, and that's a big reason for the decline. This year there was less than half of the amount of fights that there was in 2010-11. And for the record, a big part of the reason it isn't even less is largely due to the Tampa Bay Lightning making up a good amount of the total by themselves, tallying 44 fights on the season with 17 different players dropping the gloves. But also, I think it's possible that people potentially overestimated how much pure enforcers fought for justice or to protect or to avenge teammates. And it's also possible that perhaps some people overvalued what they brought and I guess still bring to the table for the few that remain, at least from say 2005 and beyond. 2005 is a relevant relevant date because the salary cap made teams have to start really thinking about who and what was worth spending money on, including whether or not to use valuable cap space on enforcers. So naturally, what exactly they brought to the table started to be examined more than ever, and that's apparently still being examined. The vast majority of fights logged by pure enforcers came from fighting other pure enforcers, not standing up for teammates or jumping people or whatever. Many of these happened right off of a face-off and were labeled staged fights, both players trying to leave their mark on the game in the only way they could. Each individual trying to give their team a spark, a momentum boost in an attempt to change their team's fortune by amping them up or to get them to wake up and care more, a show of loyalty and sacrifice to the team. Look, someone thinks this game is worth taking and giving a few punches to the head, so what's it worth to the rest of us, kind of thing. But because there are less and less enforcers to agree to this, and less other players willing to accept a mismatched fight, in the sense of not wanting to get beat up, but also being willing to trade off a mismatch of skill for 5 minutes, also with speed and skill increasing in every aspect of the game, the chance that you'll nullify a scoring opportunity for your team becomes more likely. So there are also less and less staged fights available for pure enforcers with nothing but a potential momentum boost on the line. And of course, at the same time, any spark you could potentially provide your team with a staged fight is also one the opponent could be getting. And since everyone is so skilled, the other team gaining momentum very likely means you're getting scored on, and momentum swings are taken very seriously. So even on the rare occasion two pure enforcers seeking to give their team a spark are in the lineups, a staged fight is often turned down by one of the enforcers, as that guy doesn't want to be the reason the other team gets a momentum boost and potentially changes the game. But also, again, there are still a decent amount of fights, and frequent fighters by today's standards at least. So this is where we get into how the value of pure enforcers was overestimated in recent eras, which isn't really just an opinion, it's kind of a fact that just about every NHL team is coming around to. Let's go back to how this job became a thing in the first place. How did pure enforcers come to be? The NHL was full of aggressors and frequent fighters going back to the league's earliest days, though most of them were simply a product of the unrefined, extremely dangerous, and chaotic game that was pro hockey at the time. Nevertheless, players like Eddie Shore and Red Horner could be considered the earliest version of enforcers in the 1920s and 30s. But to a degree, much of that came from them being tough humans who were in the position to establish completely unheard of experience in on-ice combat with hockey equipment on before anyone else did, and being willing to take more liberties than most NHL players at the time. Legend has it that they certainly did some rather one-sided enforcing.
How does it feel to be called a bad man, Red?
Oh, there's nothing I can do about it, Foster. I get it anyway.
But also, both of the D-men could really play the game. They weren't just goons, which is a big part of the overall point here. Lots of players through the next few decades certainly fought and enforced their fair share, but the role of a genuine, designated enforcer wouldn't really be refined all that much until around the 1960s with players like John Ferguson. Then the role progressed going into the 70s, perhaps most famously with Dave the Hammer Schultz.
On tonight's show, the second of a two-part feature on hockey's most notorious bad man, Dave Schultz.
And the job certainly made sense then, and back to the league's inception, as hockey games were still very much the Wild West. So without some level of deterrence here and there very well could have been many more injuries and shortened careers. And of course you wanted to do whatever you could to avoid your team being taken advantage of physically, regardless of injuries or dirty plays.
If some guy's going to try and intimidate our team, I was going to stand up for him.
And Magnuson, oh, a tremendous right. Magnuson is getting pummeled. He's getting beaten to a pulp.
And given that intimidation became such a factor for Dave Schultz and the Flyers, who won back-to-back Stanley Cups, in large part due to a propensity for fighting, famously being coined the Broad Street Bullies along the way, the rest of the league felt they had to adapt.
Once our teams got on the map, they went, holy shit, we better try to keep up with these guys.
So as the role became more popular and viewed as necessary, along the way through the 70s and 80s also came players like Terry O'Reilly, Willie Plett, Bob Probert, and Paul Holmgren. And of course Oilers like Dave Semenko and Marty McSorley were famously tasked with protecting the Wayne Gretzkys of the world. All of those players ended up as some of the most famous players to frequently drop the gloves in NHL history. And after some time, most of them have been primarily remembered for their fighting. However, in some sense, similar to players like Clark Gillies, who had the significant offensive prowess to somewhat mask his enforcing role in the history books, but obviously also played and excelled in the enforcer role to say the least, and players like Dale Hunter, the only player in NHL history to rack up 3,000 penalty minutes and 1,000 points, along with the Rick Tocchet's of the world, who put up 3 40-goal seasons, even tallying 109 points in the 92-93 season, but also fought and headbutted the toughest customers the league had to offer. Sure, all of the aforementioned players enforced, but that wasn't their only job. Like Shore and Horner, long before them, they too could play and put up not only decent, but sometimes very impressive numbers, especially given their usage. Even Dave Schultz, one of the most notorious fighters ever to play the game, your favorite enforcer's favorite enforcer back then, could really play. The guy scored 20 goals in the 73-74 season. So despite all of them being some of the toughest and most effective fighters to ever do it in the NHL, labeling those guys as simply fighters or goons or thugs or whatever implies that they were pure enforcers, and is a bit of an insult to their skill, which has, to a degree, tainted the legacies of some of their careers.
They see written in the papers, a goon, a guy who likes violence. But I'm not like that.
The role of pure enforcer for guys who would very, very rarely directly affect the outcome of the game with their skill on offense or defense and were there to fight and not do much else really only became a widespread staple in the 80s and early 90s, with guys like Joey Kocur, Dave Manson, Craig Berube, Stu Grimson, Tony Twist, Rob Ray, Ty Domi, Chris Nyland, and Donald Brashear. They were proof that many teams thought they needed a tough guy on their bench, and that it didn't matter if they couldn't contribute much outside of being tough, they still needed them. And not only did the employment of pure enforcers continue into the early 2000s, but once the opinion that the role of enforcer was important enough to employ players solely for their fighting ability became ingrained in the NHL, the idea that your enforcer could handle any and every challenge became difficult to guarantee. Teams wanted the ultimate intimidation factor and the ultimate deterrence on their side, the feeling that they held the ultimate trump card should things get out of hand. So, pure enforcers started to get bigger and bigger, theoretically more intimidating and difficult to beat in a fight. And with that, skill, or at least the ability to play hockey at the NHL level, became less and less relevant, which made way for guys like Colton Orr, Jody Shelley, George Laraque, Wade Belak, Derek Bugard, George Peros, and Andrew Peters. Massive, strong, and powerful fighters. Some with whatever happens, reckless abandon, others with a bit of that, but also newfound technique by hockey fighting standards, who were in the lineup for no other reason than to intimidate and to fight, and weren't expected or relied upon to do just about anything other than that. And with them, the torch was finally passed, and the age of the pure enforcers had evolved. By then, even heavy hitters like 6'9 Zdeno Chara wanted absolutely nothing to do with the strength and technique of George Laraque when the gloves came off. Here he is going for an almost immediate takedown during their first fight of the night, and here he is pulling the chute, as they say in the enforcer community, in round 2, which is getting a good grip on your opponent's jersey and falling backwards to the ice while pulling your opponent down on top of you to end the fight. And while there are still traces of pure enforcers in the NHL to this very day, their time is almost over. And in a way, when it's all said and done, it may be remembered as a shorter era than it seemed. While the 90s and early 2000s paved the way for pure enforcers and made it seem like they would be a staple of the game forever, the late 2000s and 2010s really started to reintroduce players who mirrored the 70s and 80s enforcers, who could fight the toughest of the tough any day of the week, but also really play the game. One of the biggest turning points as far as modern opinions on the role of pure enforcers started to shift back towards finding, paying, and playing the unicorn-type players of old who could comfortably fight and beat any and everyone in their path, but also play the game at the NHL level when teams got their first few looks at the late 2000s and early 2010s Boston Bruins. There were a few players from that era that I guess also could have helped move along the change in mindset, but in my opinion, if there was one player who really started the slow death of the pure enforcer role, it was Milan Lucic. If general managers at the time wanted to play an enforcer and looked at the guy they were paying and using a roster spot on to scrape by as a scoreboard liability for 6 minutes a night while taking up a potentially effective player's role, all to contribute nothing but fighting, and then watch Lucic play in almost every game, play 15 plus minutes a night, put up 20 plus goal seasons, literally put people through the glass with hits.
Going into the corner, but oh, there goes a pane of glass on a gigantic Lucic hit.
And drop the league's toughest customers whose sole job was to fight in fearless, chin-straight, all-or-nothing battles, and they didn't think twice about the pure enforcer they employed, they weren't doing their job, especially with the addition of the NHL salary cap, along with the increase in goal scoring and overall skill that the league has seen. And that's not to say he won every fight or anything, no one ever did, but he did do the job and he could play the game. With the skill of fourth-line players going up and up, there was and is nowhere to hide pure enforcers, and there's also no point in hindering line mates with them. In this case, if you can kill two birds with one stone, you'd be a fool not to, which also means those unicorn-type players who could provide everything a pure enforcer would, the intimidation, the willingness to fight any and everyone, the ability to seek vigilante justice or provide a momentum boost, but can also really affect the game, won't be a liability on the ice, and are often even worth taking off for the 5-minute penalty, have not only eliminated the need for pure enforcers, but have also increased in value.
Sort of has a wry smile there, knowing that no one's really gonna tangle with him.
And that newfound value far surpasses their fighting ability, and in most cases their hockey playing ability alone. Of course, your Brady Kajuks and Tom Wilsons don't grow on trees. However, discount versions of them who can play normal shifts sort of do. And as far as the players who get in the most fights these days, even some of the most frequent and best fighters are all very decent players by NHL standards. And all of them would have been revered as league-wide offensive stars if you could transport their skills back even just 15-20 years ago. But even right now, the current undisputed heavyweight champion of the NHL, Matthew Olivier, who is believed to be on a 20-plus fight win streak, which includes some very decisive wins over some of the other toughest customers in the league, put up 18 goals last year. Though, just for the record, look what happened when he dropped the gloves with 34-year-old Milan Lucic back in 2023. Olivier ended up turning his head away, which you almost never see from him, possibly due to a broken nose, but regardless, Lucic fed him a loss in the form of about 10 very solid right hands without ever turning his own head away whatsoever. Like him or not, good person or not, tell me that guy wasn't the nail in the coffin of pure enforcers. But anyway, yeah. Nowadays, the small group of enforcers with many more fighting majors than the rest of the league have less and less of a gap between them and non-enforcers in terms of total fights. The unicorns and more well-rounded players are now in the top 10, often top 5, and the amount of fights for the most frequent fighters is drastically lower these days, again, mainly because staged enforcer fights are becoming more and more rare. Here's how many fights the top 10 most frequent fighters combined for since the 2010-11 season. Here's how many of them averaged over 10 minutes of ice time per game, and here's how much ice time the 10 of them averaged between them. Obviously, the average time on ice hasn't declined the entire time, because of some minute-munching defensemen getting into the top 10s in the late 2010s, but even so, the main point stands all around. Less fights from the most frequent fighters, and the most frequent fighters play a lot more than they used to. None of the top 10 averaged less than 10 minutes of ice time last season, where they almost all did in the 2000s and early 2010s. Another relevant point to having those numbers leveling out, to the whole idea of having an enforcer of any kind and how effective the role has been in recent years, is what actually causes the majority of fights these days, or what's worthy of someone dishing out vigilante justice. Even every casual NHL fan knows that clean, 100% legal hits are now the most common cause of fights, no matter who's getting hit, star player or not. It's ironic that there's so many, mostly older fans and analysts who say the game is soft now, there's no big hits, but also hold the opinion that if there were more enforcers around, there wouldn't be so many big hits. Likely just a dormant, upsetting yearning for their youthful days, but a strange contradiction nonetheless. Contrary to some popular belief, the game is still very physical, and given the speed of today's game, big hits are often brutal. Even when they're clean, they're vicious given how little it takes these guys to get up to speed. And again, clean hits very often result in fights, which is one of the most prominent complaints fans have. Why is there a fight after every clean hit, is something you'll see fans say all the time. Some, myself included, feel that jumping players after they catch someone with a clean hit should result in much more severe penalties, at least a 4-minute instigator or delay a game penalty. You're ruining momentum, the pace, and the integrity of the game to have what is most of the time a little wrestle because of illegal play. For the record, in my opinion, instigator should only be called if there's deemed to have been no penalty on the initial play, but regardless, this is of course done in the name of sticking up for teammates, or perhaps trying to discourage opponents from hitting their teammates again, which clearly doesn't really work. It's worth mentioning that not all players will do this. Some players want absolutely nothing to do with protecting teammates if it means fighting, but the majority will do it, even if it means taking a few punches. And of course, it's also more difficult to tell if a dirty play even took place in the heat of the moment than it used to be. So without the bird's eye view or replays, and instead being on the ice, whether you like it or not, obviously you could understand someone trying to discourage hits at these speeds, yeah? And you might say they're a perfect chance for enforcers to get revenge or enforce, yeah? Well, not really. Any standing up for a teammate is usually done by someone already on the ice in the instant, usually immediately, and it's often more of a formality to drop the gloves after a hit than it is rage-fueled chaos, or no-holds-barred Todd Bertuzzi revenge. And again, given how enforcers are often the least skilled players, they're not on the ice a whole lot, so they usually won't be the ones fighting in the instant anyway. Even when, say, a player is kicked out of the game and has to answer the bell the next time the teams play.
Remember last year, what Hartman did to Stützle.
An enforcer is generally not going to be the guy dishing out the payback these days. It will usually be someone close to the offending player's size or perceived combat capability.
Everly doesn't fight very much. He was the player that delivered the hit that injured Andrew Cogliano.
The days of an enforcer just jumping a player out of revenge or jumping a non-fighter in eye for an eye kind of fashion are pretty much gone. So this also leaves enforcers in no man's land where they usually only ever fight other proven enforcers. Does Ryan Reeves jump Alexander Nikishin for hitting rookie Sam Dickinson? Nope. Will he be the one to fight Jason Dickinson for cross-checking star player Macklin Celebrini in the back of the head? Nope. but he will square up with Matt Rempe just for the sake of getting a fight in. So in general, a much wider variety of players fight more often. That's also not necessarily to say that there are more players with at least one fight year after year, but simply that pure enforcers are making up far less of the percentage of fights that take place and are enforcing less. Ironically, you often see less fights after dirty plays than after big clean hits now, because you're likely getting a power play after a dirty play.
Power play for the Ducks, but you got to defend your captain.
And the Lightning are going to end up with the only penalty in this whole situation.
Yeah.
Which of course works against enforcers, as they have less of a place to do what the job entails. Watch here as Pavel Mintyukov takes a dangerous little cross-check from behind, and Ross Johnston, Anaheim's enforcer, is actually on the ice for a rare shift. Does he pound Jankowski into oblivion to stick up for his teammate or prevent it happening again? Nope, he basically does nothing. Maybe gets a few words in, but that's it, because Jankowski won't fight him, he won't jump Jankowski, and the Ducks are ensured a much-needed power play.
Johnston over to answer, and you gotta hope that this doesn't get evened up.
The documentary Ice Guardians from 2016 is probably the best piece of media as far as showcasing what goes into the job of an enforcer from a mindset perspective, and it does touch on why enforcers have declined in the NHL, acknowledging that teams want to be able to roll 4 lines of at least moderate skill, etc. However, it does glorify the role and insinuate that the game would be a better, safer place with more enforcers still in the league, and more room for them to do their job in the rulebook. When discussing the decline, it ends up putting most of the weight on the instigator penalty, and states how that stopped enforcers from doing their job, which resulted in more injuries to today's star players because they can't be protected, which is a very common opinion.
And the dum-dums put in that instigator rule, and there it is.
Now again, solid documentary, worth a watch. However, in a lot of ways, despite the rules becoming more strict and there being less deliberately dirty plays and players in the league, because of the speed, athletic ability, and modern equipment, in some ways the game is the most dangerous it's ever been. And that is unavoidable when those things are considered vital to the sport's entertainment value, no matter who is in the lineup. But regardless, again, fights happen after clean hits all the time. No one fears taking an instigator penalty when they feel it's truly worth it, and those penalties get handed out all the time, yet also still aren't even called as often as they should be. So blaming the increase of injuries or the decline of enforcers on the instigator penalty makes absolutely no sense.
Do you think he'd do this against Yzerman if Probert was there? No, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, I 100% believe Matt Cook would have still done that. Other far less reckless and dirty players did, even with Probert or Kosar in the lineup and on the ice. This rosy retrospection, in some way understandable or not, is again just a longing for what some people believe to have been better times, even if the actual evidence available proves their argument for the specific part of the debate wrong.
Yzerman suffering a herniated disc. He will be out again, at least for a month, possibly 6 weeks.
Could things have been worse for star players, given how ambiguous basic rules were at the time? Absolutely. So you could say enforcers were more relevant back then, but star players still had it tough no matter who played with them. And the myth that star players just never got touched because they had enforcers there, and that those hits or dirty plays would never happen today if enforcers were still allowed to jump people without getting an extra penalty, is just that, a myth.
The league has suspended Rick Tocchet for 5 games without pay because he stuck out his knee right there and injured Stevie Yzerman the other night.
And whether anyone as a fan agrees or not, regardless of all the players who get put in the spotlight to either praise fighting and its role or throw their enforcer teammates under the bus, Yzerman himself later said that you should get a game misconduct for fighting, let alone an instigator penalty.
But did he not say it is against fighting? He did say it. No, he said they should get a game misconduct.
Now again, I'm by no means saying it was never effective whatsoever. Yzerman specifically mentioned Probert at his jersey retirement ceremony for a reason, and Detroit fans used to chant for Probert like they were summoning King Kong when the Red Wings were getting messed with for a reason. But just how much of a complete deterrence enforcers were or are is often extremely exaggerated. And we'll never know how different things would have been for certain teams had enforcers not been there to discourage certain plays, but you also might question just how effective having them around really was, or is, as players and teams under the protection of enforcers still dealt with and currently deal with dirty plays and big clean hits at any given time, regardless of having enforcers in the lineup to discourage said plays. You'll always hear old guys say that you couldn't touch Wayne Gretzky without getting jumped.
Gretzky had a credit card. He could do anything he wanted.
Which was true most of the time, but that doesn't mean people never touched him. Every star player would tell you that there's a price to pay for having the puck a lot, no matter who is in the lineup. Besides, I'm sure a guy like Keith Tkachuk would deck Gretzky and take a punch from Marty McSorley to draw a penalty all over again and twice on Sunday if he could. Unless simply having an enforcer in your lineup meant your team would literally never get touched, which has never been the case ever, it's a bit of a vicious circle. And there were, and are, lots of guys like Keith Tkachuk who would see hitting and getting jumped as a positive. for instance, his kids. And you don't need to be an especially aggressive player or the offspring of Keith Tkachuk to make the right play on the ice, which is very often smoking a good player if you can. People who impact the game most tend to take a beating, and some things never change. However, the job was created for a reason, and you can pretty safely assume that back then, enforcers did used to have much more of a legitimate place in the league, as again, there was much more of an opportunity, be it at all justified or effective or not, to dish out vigilante justice, because there was more of a need to protect players from being legally assaulted who couldn't protect themselves, as upholding the rulebook via refereeing, and of course any semblance of a player safety department was an absolute joke compared to today's standards, which is really saying something. Again, not to say it always worked, but Gretzky would likely have gotten hit and in some way hurt far more often with a McSorley and Semenko there, and the odds of someone ending a star player's career prematurely with no regard for punishment from the league in the past were much greater than someone doing that to a McDavid or a McKinnon in today's game. It's a different world, and if it's a clean play, no one will shy away from making it, no matter who they hit or who's on the other team. Hell, some guys might lose their job for not playing physical. Which brings us back to impetuous behavior and general physicality in more modern eras.
Do you think he'd do this against Yzerman if Probert was there? No, that's what I'm trying to tell you.
But yeah, that was Don Cherry talking about Matt Cook and his antics back in the day. And you two may very reasonably disagree. Having enforcers didn't matter whatsoever. Matt Cook played through the early 2000s when pure enforcers were everywhere. He tangled with the game's toughest players time after time, and he got beaten up in fights in brutal fashion on many occasions. It never stopped him from being one of the dirtiest players the game has ever seen. He was never deterred by anyone right up until his final days in the league.
Playoffs are a hard and physical time, and it's my job to be physical.
For the record, Matt Cook was one of the first Canucks to fight Steve Moore to get revenge for hitting Marcus Naslund, before the Todd Bertuzzi incident. Not saying he's some hero, just that it goes to show that having Cook, who was much more likely to seriously hurt people than any enforcer was, didn't deter Moore from hitting Naslund either.
Every time you defend fighters,
I know.
Get a little wound.
I get a little, I go a little wacko on that.
It's also ironic that some of the dirtiest players in NHL history became so before the instigator rule was added.
It happens a lot when there's open ice hits, and that's up to the discretion of the referee on the call. And
now imagine thinking that any enforcer would deter normal players from making hard but clean, routine plays in the modern game. Which brings us to the whole they discourage people from making certain plays aspect. The best example of how effective enforcers are in the modern game in regards to preventing hits is this sequence from a couple years ago. Nick Delorier is one of the toughest customers in the NHL today, and he does show flashes of skill here and there, but he is an enforcer if there ever was one. Delorier is grabbing onto Jacob Trouba all the way up the ice, trying to get Trouba to drop the gloves, and literally as he's jabbing and slashing Trouba, trying to antagonize him into fighting, Trouba steps up, absolutely drills his teammate, has some choice words for him as he stands over his body, and no one ends up doing anything to Trouba whatsoever. But you don't have to look to the past or cherry pick examples to display how irrelevant the role is becoming. Just about every single game where someone is playing a pure enforcer to this day showcases why the number one reason to play them, and believing that the threat of vigilante justice via fighting prevents players from being hit or injured makes no sense. Here's another perfectly defining example, and this one happened really recently. The Carolina Hurricanes have been criticized of being a soft team for a very long time, and I guess they agreed with the critics because at the trade deadline they made a big brain move and acquired none other than Nick Delorier. But then, in their fifth last game of the regular season, Nikita Zadorov demolishes one of Carolina's best players with Delorier in the Hurricanes lineup, after which Delorier threatens him, I guess, keywords after which, meaning he again didn't prevent anything. To top it off, Zadorov kindly asked Delorier what he was going to do about it around 5 times, making a total mockery of his role and limitations right in front of everyone on the benches. So, with the general effectiveness seriously in question, and given that the cost of playing someone like a Delorier or say a McDermott is more evident than ever, with the speed and skill of today's game, in terms of being liabilities and taking up spots for players who wouldn't be, many fans are generally not happy when they see enforcers like that in the lineup. But for others, the propaganda or past ideologies have had such a lasting impression that they still hold the seemingly antiquated belief that the role of pure enforcer is still worth having, because having him in the lineup will still deter all of our opponents from hitting our star players, even if the evidence directly opposes that theory. In regards to Curtis McDermott, people unironically say things like, let him jump someone and take a penalty, it's worth it to stop them from getting hit, or teams won't hit Sanderson and Stützle when he's there, in comment sections under videos of Sanderson or Stützle being hit, in games where McDermott was in the lineup, in moments where he was on the ice, proving that him being there doesn't prevent anything. Obviously, the potential of getting punched by anyone on the other team didn't prevent the act from happening. The hit happened. You're not going back in time to prevent it by dropping your gloves after it happens either. And of course, the offending team doesn't just stop hitting whether there's a fight or not, as it's quite literally the opponent's job to hit, and they often might even hit more afterwards as tempers start to flare. Most players are not too frightened to make clean hits, even at these high speeds, just because someone on the other team could beat them up if they do. If they were, no one would ever hit. Of course, there's the argument that enforcers could embolden the rest of the team to get more physical themselves, but more well-rounded players could also do that. Worse yet, enforcers are obviously a welcome sight for the opposition. Everyone would love for their opponents to play their pure enforcers as much as possible, so they could take advantage of their weakest player. You may be reminded of the famous Mike Rupp quote when talking to Jody Shelley.
You're fucking irrelevant out here. If you're at any outcome on the game, I fucking go.
The real telling point as far as how effective even the teams who still employ pure enforcers think they are is in the playoffs. Almost no one is okay with their fourth line being unplayable because of a weak link in the postseason, and all of the potential benefits of playing an enforcer are usually thrown out the window. When the playoffs come around and the games really matter, despite the fact that momentum means more than ever, that emotions and tempers are at their highest, that the games are often at their most physical, intense, and dirty, all while the refs put away their whistles on debatable plays more than the regular season, and that the league dishes out less supplementary discipline or justice after the fact, teams usually don't play their enforcers, electing more all-around capable players instead. Why? Because they want to win. Most teams decide that regardless of any potential benefits some think enforcers provide, they're not worth it if you want to give yourself your best chance at winning, something you'd think would also be applied to the regular season as half the league doesn't even make the playoffs. However, on the rare occasions when pure enforcers do get played in the playoffs, with the referees being less strict, you can bet that no one is touching, say, a star rookie defenseman.
And Nikishin is not quite sure where he is right now.
All of that is why pure enforcers are almost completely extinct in the NHL, and at this rate, we'll likely have seen the last of them in the next decade or so. 15, 20 years ago, every team had at least one of these guys in the lineup more often than not, sometimes more than one. And today, only about a third of the league still uses players that you would consider pure enforcers. Also, many of those guys aren't exactly pure enforcers, as they also play meaningful third-pairing defense roles, while others are playing their way out of the I don't do anything but fight label. So depending on how you classify them, they could be used even less. Yet, again, some undeniable pure enforcers do still get played by a few teams. So are those teams just completely delusional, or is there still anything else to it? Well, really, the only possible reasons enforcers are ever still around is for team morale, should an individual provide it.
Come on, boys, we're dominating this period. Keep going. Shoot everything.
You can get by and be worth keeping around even with a very combative personality or polarizing social dynamic if you're a good player, but if you're a borderline unplayable guy like some enforcers, your personality and demeanor generally have to benefit the team in above and beyond ways if you're going to be kept around. I'll mention Ross Johnston again. From what I've seen, he comes off as a beneficial presence simply in terms of communication. Just looking at the social dynamic he seems to bring from an outside perspective, he seems to provide good vibes, as they say. And hey, having someone who is an effective communicator, who is likely in part only able to balance having the beneficial presence amongst entitled and awkward athletes because of the trials and tribulations of their own careers, could just be the integral piece of the puzzle that makes them worth having around regardless of how much they fight, if at all. However, like every other point, it is possible to get personalities like that from players who can regularly affect the game on the scoreboard as well, so even that isn't going to keep these guys around forever. And then yeah, all things considered, it's pretty clear why the days of pure enforcers are numbered. And because it's a supply and demand situation, less players will become pure enforcers, as the option to become one will not be extended much longer. In the end, every current or short-term future enforcer has two choices: scrape by and take work from anyone who's willing to hire them for the last bit of time that anyone will be, or adapt and add more to their game. Back to Ross Johnston one more time. He has definitely fit the definition of a pure enforcer for his entire career, and he's one of the toughest guys in the league. He even fought 4 games in a row at one point this season, which is very rare these days, but he clearly knew his career was going to be in jeopardy if the Ducks were indeed going to improve this year, so he's doing his best to stay relevant and worth playing by drastically elevating his game. He's having far and away his best season from a hockey standpoint, so much so that he's remarkably removing the pure enforcer label from his name, even earning some third-line minutes here and there, something that would have been unthinkable as recently as the start of the season. He's taking the better of the two options, the one that you'd hope all these guys have someone in their corner pushing them towards. Trying to become a playable asset like they used to be in other levels of hockey is the best thing they can do, and it's worth mentioning that that is how it used to be for these guys.
It wasn't one of those things that I thought, geez, I want to be like Dave Schultz. I want to be a fighter in the NHL. No.
That's Bob Probert referring to him not wanting to be Dave Schultz. And here's Dave Schultz himself making very similar statements.
I didn't start playing hockey to go on the ice and fight. It's the last thing I would have thought of.
Being a hockey fighter isn't something just about any enforcer aspired to be. Most enforcers, new and old, will say that they didn't intend on being one whatsoever. They were all very good players at some level who were eventually told that this is what they had to do if they wanted to keep making a living by being a hockey player.
For me, it was, I want to be like a Bobby Orr. I want to be somebody that can score goals and be an offensive threat.
And of course today, with enforcer jobs dwindling, it's not exactly a reliable fallback option to break into the league anymore, or one to extend your career with, be it for job security or of course for health. Most NHL careers are not massive portions of life in the grand scheme of things after all, and your quality of life after hockey is something that's being considered more and more as time goes on. The health risks of things going wrong in a fight are very well known, as of course are the health risks that come with fighting even when things go right. Well, at least they're more widely understood and acknowledged these days. We obviously can't be sure of how much that affects what these athletes decide to do, especially because they're still willing to play a high-speed, full-contact sport, where body checks have likely caused far more head injuries than fights. And of course, once it's your only option to continue your career, many would still do it, but the deaths of former players like Derek Bugard, Wade Belak, and Rick Rippon brought concerning trends to light, with studies linking the career of all three enforcers to brain damage, and significantly increasing the risk of brain damage has likely discouraged some people from becoming enforcers, when that's all they could do to continue pursuing professional careers, or whether or not to extend their professional careers, and the same with the aftermath of Bob Probert's death. Of course, that isn't a black and white issue where hockey enforcing is the one and only thing that caused this stuff, but the side effects of the lifestyle and what likelihoods it could increase could cause more people to view enforcing or fighting and even just playing the game as a more serious risk than they used to. But anyway, that's why we're witnessing the end of the pure enforcers. And it seems like the borderline guys will eventually go the same way. In saying all this, don't get me wrong, the job of an enforcer is a fascinating one for the spectacle and psychological aspects, and it always has been. But overall, aside from rare staged fights, an enforcer fulfilling the traditional aspect of the job is a chicken or the egg scenario. And unless you're a chickens being made out of thin air kind of person, like the egg, plays deemed worthy of producing a fight come before the fight. And in today's game, there are less eggs than there used to be. And again, when they're laid, someone who's capable of affecting the game on the scoreboard and also looking after the egg will be there.
It's the climax of the egg's existence.
And yes, now since enforcers and fighting in general are becoming more rare, the odd occasions when they do step back into the spotlight tend to bring out more, shall we say, unique emotions in fans, and it can garner tons of attention. Whether that emotion or attention is good or bad is up to you. Some think fighting will eventually be eliminated from the game altogether based on modern trends. I think that's extremely unlikely. Even as it becomes more and more rare, and the long-term dangers become even more widely understood and experienced, those at the helm of the hockey world understand that it not only makes the sport stand out, but that a big portion of hockey fans love that settling disputes or battling for changes in momentum can be done by any two competitors with their fists at any time. And of course, for many, it just adds a unique layer of entertainment that no other team sport does. Even though most fights aren't, shall we say, quality fights or very entertaining at face value for, say, average combat sports fans, again, it's the unpredictable timing, the emotion-charged spontaneity, and the, quite frankly, shocking legality of fights breaking out in a team sport that makes it different. That's what makes fighting in hockey grab and hold the attention of fans new and old, from those who blindly love to watch punches get thrown, to those who fully recognize the risks and are perhaps even against fighting being part of the game. I do, however, think it's very possible, given how inconsistent the player safety department is when it comes to suspensions, that we see some of these guys get told to transform into full-on goons here and there. By that I mean come into a game and do something dirty with no concern for tomorrow or the future of their NHL career. There's no logic in seething to the point of tears or screaming about how because someone got injured, someone else now deserves to get injured in eye-for-an-eye fashion. Everyone needs to grow up and move on if they're capable, unless they truly enjoy watching a Todd Bertuzzi incident once a week, and feel better after they see it. Of course, there is a difference in making players pay the price within the rules and simply trying to injure players. And given the alternative, paying your dues within the rules should be encouraged. But, in saying that, the player safety department also has to adapt and grow up themselves. The game is incredibly fast, and the faster players can get up to speed and shift side to side, the more injuries we'll see. No matter who's in the lineup, it doesn't take a deliberate, premeditated attempt to injure or to cause serious injuries anymore. All it takes is a slight gap in skill, resulting in poor positioning and opponents making quick movements to exploit it. They have to threaten players with serious suspensions and set brand new precedents, forcing players to cut their losses and refrain from certain dangerous last-ditch efforts, or finishing hits on players in vulnerable positions if they truly want to avoid some injuries. And also set the standard for teams not to expect those dangerous efforts from their players if they get burned by legitimate hockey plays. If they neglect the issue, the injuries will continue to pile up no matter who's in the lineup, and the goons will return. For the record, standing up for your team and going out to hurt people are very different things. That's what separates enforcers from callous career kamikaze goons. And no one in their right mind should hope that anyone is instructed or feels an inclination to deliberately injure innocent players. But that could be where things end up if changes in the sport aren't accounted for, especially since, again, those same changes, the speed, the skill, the high impact hits, and the need for everyone to play physical, have made the job of genuine enforcers obsolete. Because unfortunately, the cat is out of the bag, and the traditional job of an enforcer will never be as effective as it once was. And thus, we have come full circle. And while we'll likely see a few more massive attention and punch to the dome magnets like Matt Rempe come and go, briefly bringing fighting and enforcers back into the spotlight for a week or two along the way, whether or not anyone will miss them, we will almost certainly continue to see less and less pure enforcers as the years go by, and one day they'll probably be a relic of the past. When that day comes, the bygone era, along with the careers of those who lived through it and did the job, will bewilder fans new and old more than ever. Until then, you can still marvel at the job they do when they do it, and the career they've made out of fighting in hockey, but enjoy it, or I guess be frustrated by it while it lasts, because the age of enforcers is almost over.
I don't know that this helps the league at all. No, it doesn't, Sam, but it doesn't happen often anymore.
Instead of going and pushing somebody around, I want to be more, no one's going to push us around.
It is one of the most disgusting, brutal parts of NHL hockey.
You're saying you have to have fighting in the game to keep it clean?
Yes. There's been really no rules to take fighting out of the game. It's kind of happened naturally.
And I mean, my son's going to say, look at my stats and say, Father, what were you doing?